Keedy. I am a graphic, the bulk of my activity has been as an instructor, graphic design teacher at California Institute of the Arts, and in the process of being a teacher at Cal Arts for about 30 or so years now. I also do graphic design, have been a graphic designer, and then in the process of that kind of became a type designer, and which started to take over more and more of my activity. So I do now. I've shifted. I don't do hardly any graphic design. I stopped doing too much client work, and now I focus just on type design. So now it's mostly type design and teaching. The occasional project when it comes, I'll do. Yeah, that's it. No. Well, actually, yes. I was thinking my undergrad, but yeah. After Cranbrook, I came straight here. Actually, Lorraine asked me to come. We came at the same time, and she was a full-time and was a director, and I was just teaching 2 classes, and that was the start. Because I just graduated from Cranbrook, and my plan was very much to go to New York. Just been there for the summer before, visited, and I also, actually no, the summer before that I worked in Chicago, and I was given a decent job offer there, but I didn't want to go to Chicago, and I thought, well, no, I want to go to New York because that's where it's happening, and that's where at that point that's 80s. That's where a lot of people were going, mid to late 80s, but then Ed Fella said, Lorraine Wild, and who I knew and I met because Lorraine was a visiting designer at that's actually how I first met her. She's a visiting designer at Cranbrook because she's an alum, and so I knew who Lorraine was, and then Ed said, Lorraine has just got this job. April Greiman left Cal Arts, and Lorraine's going to sort of take over for April Greiman, and you should go. You should go there and do that and go teach and totally do all that. And I'm like, I don't know. But then Ed kind of talked me. Ed talked both me into it and Lorraine into me. So So that's how that happened. And so Lorraine said, come down, and I said well, I'm not going to pack all my belongings in a U-Haul and go to Los Angeles for 1 class. You gotta give me more than 1 class. But so I did it, and so then I did come down here for my it was $5,000. So packed everything up and came down here, and that was it. So obviously I also had to work, and so Karen came with me, Karen Aono, and so I started teaching here, and then freelancing and getting work, and Karen was getting work, and so designing was always a necessity too. That came later, and actually Ed wasn't here. I mean, that's a funny thing because we both knew Ed, and he was kind of like the third person in setting that all up. But Ed still hadn't even been to school. Ed was just hanging out in Detroit. He was just someone everybody in design knew, and he hung out at Cranbrook, and most of Cranbrook people knew him. That's where I met him, obviously. And so then when we came down here and started the school, Ed was going into Cranbrook and starting school. So he was a student while we were starting this program. Ed came, we were here for, I think, at least a good 5 years before we brought Ed. And so, and it's not like that was the plan or anything, 'cause Ed didn't really know what he was going to do at that time. He just knew he wanted to quit work, and his kids were gone, he wanted to go back to school. So but I don't think he had any plan for what to do afterwards. And so once he graduated, I think we were just both like, Ed, come down here, come, and so then we're talking him into coming in. Okay. So then 5 years later he came down, and that was really when the program really started. It was the three of us kind of getting together and figuring out what the program should be. Yeah, we had a studio for about, I think, a whole year called Agenda, which, it was a very interesting studio, but it's sort of like all three of us were designers and kind of doing our own thing and designing, and none of us had the least bit of kind of like business sense or savvy how to keep a studio afloat and going, you know, and no one wanted to pay attention to any of that. We just wanted to do the work, and we just wanted, and you know, and we're pretty good. We got, you know, enough sort of clients and enough work and a few things in, but we were very, very impractical in the work that we did. We'd spent forever on projects, and we, you know, we weren't. Yeah, it wasn't very practical. It was just an excuse for us to be all together in a studio and hang out. It really was that. But then after about a year or so of that, and also necessity, we all needed to get more serious. Lorraine wanted to do more and more just book work, and then Ed and I were like, no, we don't want to just do books, we want to do this other stuff. And so because we're such independent people anyway, you know, we were just kind of all independently working in a room in the end, and so we decided to divvy that all up, and then we kind of split up. And we're all together on CalArts anyway, so we didn't, in a way, I think we didn't need our studio practices to also be together. It was a bit much. What is it keeps me teaching? That I get better, that I learn stuff and get better. You know, that's like the surprising thing. Like, you know, you have to know, like when I decided I wanted to teach type design history, it's like, I think I know a thing or two about it. Turns out I don't. So I had to learn, right? And I'm still learning and still thinking about how do you do in a post-internet era, how do you teach history? And that's very different than certainly the models I had when I was back in university and had plenty of history courses and all that, but it was done in a very different way. It's like, well, how do you teach history post-internet? And so that was an interesting problem and continues to be. And so every year I look at my class and I switch it up, change it around, respond to the students. They have, you know, things they're interested in, not interested in. So the way you keep doing it is it just keeps being interesting. Right? If it wasn't interesting, you quit. Just like, because it would not be fun. So it's been interesting, and I guess the interesting part is I keep learning stuff. I keep learning new stuff. And you know, I first started teaching type design. It was with Fontographer, right? And I learned that because I didn't have, no one taught me. But then after that, I went to Font Lab, and after Font Lab, and now I'm doing glyphs. So I had to teach 3 different software, you know, and now everything is much more, you know, OpenType's gotten even more complicated. Now it's variable fonts that everyone's excited about and all this. So it keeps going. There's more and more things. There's more technology things, and then there's also the idea of what is this stuff. So that's interesting too. So yeah. The answer is that it keeps being interesting. That's why you keep doing it. My views on education have changed because education has changed so much. I mean, there's like the big thing, education has changed, but then also I'm here in a very specific place, very specific institution, and I've seen this, having been here for about 30 years, I've seen this place change also. As it would. So education in general has changed. This institution has changed. The students are very different type of person. The students have changed a great deal. So, and that's maybe part of the whole thing why you keep doing it, because it's like, it's not static. It keeps moving along. And it's when you stop and think about it and remember things from the past, you realize just how much it's changed. And it's changed a great deal. It's just that you're in it and you kind of like, keep up with it. The thing about switching out from grad, like the last time I did it, it was 4 or 5 years ago, I did 2 years. The last 2 years was MFA, and I had to do that because we were actually kind of short-handed, and it was mostly just me and Michael handling grads for a couple of years there. And I enjoyed doing that, but also we were trying to change our faculty here, and I thought that it would be, the way to do it would be for me to get out and let someone get in. See, the thing is, you're taking a place, and someone, you know, can't take that place if you're in there. And I thought, well, then that's the thing for me to do. I should get out of the grad program, and also graphic design and design education evolved quite a bit and is changing and is becoming something very different than maybe what would be all of what I would think my areas of expertise, but probably more importantly my areas of interest. It's like so many of the things that people, you know, like for example, design as a performative practice, that would be exactly the opposite of anything I ever would have had any interest or belief in years ago, you know, but the world changes but I'm just not, you know, I'm not the person for that. I'm not going to put a lampshade on my head, dance in my underwear, leave that to Elliot Earls. But but I understand that design practice is changing, you know, and so now there's this design as being performative, much more collaborative, you know, it's gone on to be something quite different, and taking on all these different places that I would not have expertise or interest in, and so I figure, okay, that we need someone else to go in that direction. Plus, I had my 25 plus years of controlling and directing it, and at some point, it's like, well, you should move and let somebody else do it. So it was very much feeling that. I mean, I'm still involved in the sense I still have graduate students who are in type design and in my history course, and I still, you know, meet and talk with them, but I'm not directing the program, and nor I don't think I should be at this point. Because there's like 3 of us, probably. Okay. Yeah. There's like 2 or 3. So yeah, I think the very low numbers and the extremely low bar helped a great deal. That's been an ongoing question, and I'm curious about that too. I just saw a job posting for a full-time design theory criticism faculty.
Where?
Position. It's in the UC system. They're looking for someone. I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. So it's a thing, as it should be in academia, but the question is it a thing in practice? Is it a thing in the world? Well, it's never been, because practitioners practice. But it should be a thing in academia. The thing is, it hasn't, I think the academics have been very bad at carrying the torch and at continuing it. And the fact that sort of criticism, theory, and a kind of the seriousness that one could bring to graphic design, the fact that it kind of hasn't happened, that has to be placed on academia. That's the fault because that's their job, is to make that happen and continue it, and they've not done that. So I think it's a failure of design education. They just and what they've done is a kind of very light version of it that is not useful and not so. In their defense, I would say, because I also am a design academic, it's probably because the technology thing, just like it was one thing after another after another. You know, starting from in the early analog days when I started, there was a very clear idea of what a graphic designer was. They did a very set few things, and the practice had more or less been like that for the past 50 to 80 years. It hadn't really changed at all. And so there was this clear idea of what it is. Well, then all of a sudden, because of technology, boom, it's like, oh, well, no, now it's this, now it's not just print, now it's, and it just kind of exploded and then continued, and then there's social media, and then it's really, all these changes have been thrown at design. And so in what schools do is they try to stay on top of things and say, oh, we're on top of this, and so they've been chasing that. They've been chasing the next thing. They've been chasing being on top of the next thing, VR work or this or that. It's kind of endless, and I think that has taken all their power, and all the sort of everything has been going to that, and then now design is whatever you say it is. So it's extremely, the metaphor I always use for design is if it's like a river that at that sort of point just prior and at the very beginning of digital technology into the 90s, the river was still kind of fairly narrow and fairly deep, but then what happened is it just went like this, and now the river is wide for miles, but it's like an inch deep, and so I think that's kind of what's happened, is that it's still a lot is going on, and there's a lot that's interesting and everything, but it's dissipated over this gigantic sort of space, right? I think the reason a lot of people have a nostalgia for like the 90s in design is because it was still tight enough and it was concentrated enough, and there was still, back in the 90s, there was a we. When you said graphic designer, there was a sense of who we were as graphic designers. Now when you say graphic designer, I was a 12-year-old with a laptop and also, some .com manager somewhere, and some, they're all graphic designers. It's a question as what the vocation even is anymore.
Yeah.
So, and it's the good thing and the bad thing. The good thing is it's whatever you say it is, but that's also a really bad thing, because you can change what you say, and therein lies the problem. It's hard for me to see it not as Rudy and Suzanne, because we're friends. So it's very hard for me to just see it as like the magazine and a body of writing and everything like that. It's more like, you're friends and you're both engaged and interested in something, and that's an ongoing thing, So it's very hard for me to see it outside of our friendship. By our friendship, I mean it's also our discussion and our conversation, because when we get together and talk, Rudy and Susanna when they're in town, or if I get up to Berkeley, it just picks right up where it left off, right? And in that sense, it's continued. It's just that we don't write it all down, and he doesn't publish it, and it isn't. The conversation is still going, and still continues. It's surprising. It's surprising how it's looked at now. I would just say at the time when we were doing all this, there actually wasn't a thought for what it would be, and we were very much in the, and I think you can see it when you read the old Emigres. We are very much in that moment, and it's very much like, here's what we're thinking right now, here's the positions we have, and here's what we think is important, and here, it's very much present and in that moment, and I think that's why people thought it was interesting and sort of found it engaging. Also why maybe now it's interesting is almost a time capsule to sort of see how people thought about what they were doing and what it meant to them then, which again is very different than how people think of what design is now. I thought, sort of like talking about me moving out of the grad program a bit, I thought in my conversation with Rudy were that it was making space for something else to happen, because it was like, okay, we had a good run, we did this thing, and it evolved, and Rudy took it to where he could, and we were eager to see what was going to happen next and see what would take its place. The very beginning, the first start was dot dot dot, which seemed like it could be that, but in fact it wasn't. They really kind of went in a different direction, and it really was. It sort of was something else. And then there was the idea, well, will it be like blogs and stuff like that? And I think nothing kind of replaced it in the sense of having as fixed of a focus and a place where everyone would go, because already by the end of Emigre, things were going like this, right? Things were already like blowing up, and already, and the audience was already becoming too diverse. There was already too many different types of people who say they're graphic designers, and so I think it'll never. It's hard to imagine that ever being possible, because I know Jared Fuller asked that question and has some nostalgia for that time period in the 90s and that idea, and like, oh well, will it happen again, or who would we? And I don't think it's likely, because design is too diverse of a practice, and it's too big, and it's too. That's why I've always thought, and this is super unpopular, why I've always thought that disciplinarity is important, you know, and me, the person who was anti-discipline my whole early career, and I now see that actually it's important, because there has to be a there. And the problem is there isn't. And so if there were like not just a sort of Emigre replacement, but let's say 4 or 5, that would cover various areas, but would be disciplines that would have borders, would have edges, and would have something. Because the thing about criticism, if you know, criticism is a judgment. When you make a criticism, you're basically making a judgment about something. Well, you can't judge something unless you have a criteria. What are you judging it based on? What is the criteria? And that's why disciplinarity has to be there. The discipline has to set the criteria, and that has to be clear. The problem now is there's no criteria. Everything is open. Everything's up for grabs. And if there is a criteria, it's constantly shifting, or the criteria is super vague, you know. And so those are big problems. I think those are big hurdles, and I don't see in the subsequent generations the kind of will to want to bring about a kind of rigor and disciplinarity and all that to what they're doing. You know, especially when you're young, the tendency is like, no, I don't want to focus and do less. I want to do more. You know, and I want to be interested in this and that and this, and so everyone is sort of a dilettante. But I think that's the 21st century. We're all dilettantes. Interestingly, print is kind of back as a printed publication. They have this little thing they've done, what is it, issue number 4, I think, is now, where they put everything to, and so, in fact, I just got the last one. The newest one is out, because I'm very curious about that. I also keep up with their blog and their website, which has a bunch of really ridiculous content. I mean, just so bad, but anyway. But they, and the idea is, you know, you continue with that, and then you do like a quarterly or something like that. So they do have a printed, and I think from what I could tell, I think it's doing well.
Really?
Yeah, because you know, yeah, they're like on like the 4th volume, and I've talked to another young designer who's trying to get his own publication going, Amalgam. There's 1 issue so far, and he's working on the 2nd issue that's supposed to be out soon. And there's other. So I think there's always going to be something there. There's always going to be someone who's going to try and, you know, publish and print. It's whether it reaches a critical mass, and then what happens with it is the big question. Right now, there still is that whole like print fair thing of people doing risograph zines or whatever, and again, there's like a ton of stuff, but no real consensus, and no, you know, it's just all over the place, and so it doesn't seem to be very useful. I think people like objects, and objects have an importance because the main importance is objects stay and people go away. and so those objects are valuable in that sense, and will always be important in that way. So I don't think that's ever going to go away. So I think there will be object making, I think there will be publications, I think there will be books, and it'll start to happen. It's just that it, you know, with the internet, particularly social media, it's really done in the idea of that kind of communication. So I think we probably experienced maybe one of the harshest dips, you know, in this thing that goes up and down, and we experience a really harsh dip, but I think it will inevitably have to go up because we actually need these objects. We need documentation, we need imprinted objects, we need to have them. So I think, yeah, it's just a matter of time. People forget about that, but I think it's all up, you know, of course books, but all sort of designed objects, buildings, like everything. Most of what we come in contact is due to all the dead people. You know, that's what we get. And it's real hubris on our part to, while we're here, to forget that and to think and to feel like we're going to be here forever, but we're not. What's happened is I've revisited it, because I did it, you know, way back in 1989, I think, when I started, 88, 89, and that was a long time ago. So I did revisit it to update it and to try and make it still work and make sense in this digital context. Of course, when I did it then, it was all really for print, was what was in my head, and that's all mostly what I knew. And so now revisiting it and looking at it, it's thinking like, well, how it will work, you know, in the web sort of and digital environment, and what it can do differently. So I updated it by trying to make it work today, by taking out the things that are no longer work. I mean, for a lot of people, the level of idiosyncrasy is of no interest to people now, you know. And so how do I take that out? So then I decided, okay, I'm doing Keedy black. So going to the black weight takes everything that's kind of there, but simplifies it in a sense and unifies it much more. And so I took out a lot of the kind of really more idiosyncratic things, and I had alternates for those characters. So it was, for me, I was trying to update it. Just take that and update it. And plus, you know, I learned a few things since then, and I thought I could like make a few things better and do it. It was only as good as it was thanks to Susanna, because she, you know, helped me finish it. Rudy wanted the typeface, and I didn't want him to have it, and so that's why it took a couple of years of him talking me into it, because I said, no way, dude, it's like, this is ridiculous. No, I said, no one's gonna be interested in it. Back at that point in like the end of the 80s, when the Fontographer and all that came along, by we I mean Ed and Lorraine and, you know, the design, we thought that all designers would more or less start designing their own typeface. Like every graphic designer over time would have like one or two sort of bespoke fonts that would be a part of their repertoire and what they would do. And we thought it would be more like that. Not that you would, you know, so that you would keep your own font. You'd design a font, you'd use it, it'd be yours, period. And we thought it would be much more of a kind of bespoke kind of thing. And so that's why I was actually surprised when Rudy said, no, I want to take your typeface and I want to sell it. And then I'm like, oh, Rudy, you just want to make money. You're just like a, you know, which I get, that's fine, but I don't think you'll make any with this typeface. So yeah, so he talked me into, so I sent him the files, and then, and of course Susanna said, yeah, this has got to be cleaned up, and it has to make more sense for other people to use. Because again, this was strictly a tool for my use. That's all I saw it as. That actually was Ed Fella who made me change the name to Keedy Sans. The original name was really dumb because I was young and foolish. The original name was Bondage Bold. And because I had a bunch of typefaces. you know, again, if you think these are for my use only, right? I have like 4 or 5 type, and if I get a project or a job, I'd like to sign a typeface and use it for that job, and then I'd work on it and then keep it going. And that was the only thought of how it existed. And that particular typeface was called Bondage Bold. There was only a bold weight, there wasn't a regular weight, and it was, you know, for doing the Bondage Bold job that it needed to do. So when Susanna took over basically and said, no, we got it, she said, you need to make a regular weight, because at that time they sold it on diskettes and they sold 2 weights together, so, which I didn't really want to do. She said, so you have to make a regular weight, and with this, and I was doing that, and it was when I was in the studio with Agenda with Ed, and Ed said, don't call it Bondage Bold, that's dumb, you know, it just sounds, you know, childish and stupid, don't call it. And he said, you should call it Keedy Sans, like Gill Sans, and like all those other, and he said the other reason is because at that time only Susanna was designing their typefaces, no one else. They hadn't asked anyone at that point. And he said, and everyone will think Susanna did it if you don't put your name on that. And I always listen to Ed, so I changed the name to Keedy Sans, because Ed said to do that. Because he makes sense. He's got some good ideas. I think you should always listen to your elders, but not necessarily do what they say. But you absolutely should listen, you know. And now as an elder, I really believe that. But I always did. Maybe that's this whole Midwest thing or something. But it's like I always, you know, always listen to your elders, but don't necessarily do what they say. You know, you have to still make your own decision, but definitely listen to what they have to say. And if you listen to what they have to say, and if you can figure out, to you it sounds like bullshit or whatever, then okay, right? Then it is, you know. But if it isn't, if you don't have a better argument, you should probably do what they say.